Hello everyone. Today I'm going to share with you 3 stories that you wish were made up. Crimes committed that are really hard to imagine. Of the 3 stories that I'm going to share, one of them in fact is made up. And after the 3rd story is told, I'll share which 2 are sadly true and which one was a fabrication. I will change the names of the true stories, but I will reveal the true identities at the end. If this sounds like something you would like to see more of, please subscribe, turn on all notifications, and hit that like button so I know to keep making more. Let's begin with story number 1. Carjacking gone horribly wrong. Sarah Smith grew up with a very rocky past, having had multiple suicide attempts. There were reports of Sarah's mother's second husband sexually assaulting her growing up, which obviously led to some mental health issues with Sarah. When Sarah became an adult, she married a man named David, and while they did have a rocky relationship due to multiple accusations of affairs, they did have 2 beautiful boys. However, on October 25th, 1995, Sarah rushed to the police station and begged for help. According to Sarah, she had been carjacked by a black man, and her 2 sons, aged 14 months and 3 years old, were in the backseat at the time. Her and her husband David were beside themselves. Police opened up a massive search for her vehicle, setting up police barricades around the city and getting as much officer manpower on this case as possible, in hopes of saving these 2 little boys and bringing them home to their parents. On day 2 of the investigation, police began to have questions about Sarah's story. She said she was approaching an intersection that was empty, but the light suddenly turned red, forcing her to stop. It was at this point that the carjacker forced himself into her car and drove off with her 2 sons in the back seat, just leaving her standing on the street. When she said which intersection this took place is when police began to wonder if she was telling the truth. This particular intersection will only turn red for cars coming in the intersecting direction. This indicated that Sarah was lying. She claimed that no other cars were present at the intersection. For 9 days following the carjacking, Sarah insisted that her story was true. She had made numerous public emotional pleas for her children to be brought home safe and sound, garnering a lot of sympathy all over America. Nothing came up, no reports of her car or the sons that were missing. Police now shifted their search to the local lakes and rivers, wondering if maybe the man dumped the car there. They searched several of the local rivers, but found nothing. That was until one day they saw what they believed was an outline of a car at the bottom of a local lake. They called in divers and went down. The car was roughly 120 feet from the shore. In one report, a diver had returned to the surface and removed the gear from his head. It was revealed that he was crying. The image that greeted him down below was too much to handle. In the car, located at the bottom of the lake, were the bodies of 2 children, which later determined to be the sons of Sarah and David. As police pressed Sarah more, she revealed that she made up the carjacking. She herself drove her car into the lake with her 2 sons strapped into the back, only to dive out herself last minute. The sympathy that initially was felt for Sarah was immediately erased, and the public showed great hostility, not only for her actual crime of murder, but blaming a black man, which also caused great racial issues in the community. The reason she killed her 2 kids is based on who you choose to believe. During the trial, it was revealed that Sarah had been in a relationship with a man who on that morning sent her a letter ending the affair, claiming that he did not want kids. People then believed that she intentionally murdered both of her kids as a way to try and still be with this man. According to Sarah, however, this is not true. She was heartbroken over the relationship ending and was not in the right state of mind, not even being fully aware of what she was doing. Her defense team claimed mental health issues, but the jury didn't buy it, and she was sentenced to 30 years behind bars, which is where she still sits today. Sarah wrote a letter in 2015 claiming the same story, that she didn't kill her 2 children just to be with that man, and only lied to protect her then husband, but not many believe her. Her ex-husband is said to have never been able to forgive her. Story number 2. A terrifying confession. This story is told from the perspective of Glenn Thomas, a London, England man who grew up with a blue-collar but loving family. His parents loved him and his little brother very much. They both worked a lot to make ends meet for their family, the father being a waste disposal man, and the mother working as a secretary for an accounting firm. While not rich, they still lived a very comfortable life. But for whatever reason, this was not good enough for Glenn. In 1997, when they were just teenagers, they both ran away from home. London, especially during this time, was having issues with gang violence. However, this wasn't seen as an issue for Glenn or his little brother Dylan, but as an opportunity. They wanted to feel a sense of belonging, something their parents swear they offered plenty of before they ran away. After doing some digging, they found a gang that went under the name the New Cut Gang. Their initiation was simple: mug someone, and then they'd be accepted in. Glenn and Dylan dove into this new lifestyle very quickly. As Glenn was a very large man, he was mostly used for intimidation purposes, but this gang was first and foremost used for trafficking drugs. Dylan said himself that he was very cautious about this life, mostly following in his brother's footsteps, but other reports indicate that he was just as aggressive and committed as Glenn. Glenn, however, admitted himself to enjoy the act of scaring people, and sometimes the violence that would result, often from opposing gangs. Others reported Glenn to be cold and callous, showing little to no remorse for his actions, and would never have guessed he originally came from a happy household. He was only 18 years old during this time. This part of the story is to share a bit of insight into Glenn, as we now jump right to the trial. His mother and his father, and even Dylan, were sitting in the courtroom during this time. The following is told from a first-person perspective. It is a reenactment of the confession that was obtained from officers' notes. The officers who were sitting in the courtroom during this confession claim it was one of the most chilling moments of their entire careers.
I was sitting in a park, kind of near a walking path. The park is quite secluded though, it's a long path. I didn't really have a plan, just sat on a local bench and waited. I didn't know what I was waiting for, but knew I wanted to make an impact. Drugs was kind of getting boring, not really doing anything for me anymore. I wanted to do something bigger. I saw the occasional jogger or dog walker, but decided to let them be. Then, in the distance, I heard the voices of a family, or so I thought. I wasn't sure how many, but definitely more than a couple. When they came into view, I saw a family of 4, a husband and wife, and 2 teenagers, 1 boy and 1 girl. I think they saw me, but didn't really seem to react. I mean, why would they? I thought this was my perfect opportunity. When they crossed the part of the path I was sitting, I pulled out my gun and told them to stop. If they ran, I would surely have caught 1 or more of them. Luckily for me, they didn't bolt, but did look very frightened. This gave me joy. The father was a very large man, looked like a pro rugby player or something, so I had to be careful with him. He tried to push the rest of the family behind him. I told them all to walk into the bushes behind me. I again reminded them that if they scream or run, then I'll start shooting. I didn't really know my full plan at this point, but the fear I was putting into their eyes was enough for me to keep going. It fueled me. We walked into the path. All 4 were holding on to each other. I kept maybe a distance of 5 or so feet back, and when we were furthest away from bumping into other people, I told them to stop. I had 3 sets of handcuffs with me. I instructed the father to handcuff himself as well as the mother, and the 2 teenagers to handcuff themselves to each other. I then told them to sit on the ground and wait. The father mostly kept asking me what I wanted, to not hurt his kids, but I didn't really listen. So there they sat, and here I stood, pistol in hand. I wasn't entirely sure of my next step, to be honest, but an impact is what I wanted to do. So, I figured now is as good time as any. I don't think they saw it coming, but I pointed my gun at the father and pulled the trigger. It echoed more than I had hoped, but luckily I got a headshot. I think he was dead immediately. The family was bawling. I kind of leaned against a tree and watched their hysterics, almost like they forgot I was there. They surrounded the father. Only when the mother turned to face me did I shoot her too. Kind of hit her in the neck. She slumped over her husband and seemed to bleed out a bit before she stopped squirming. Both teenagers were frantic. The boy actually got up and tried to rush me, but his sister didn't know this was happening, and because they were handcuffed together, he tripped. I walked over to his body and shot him twice in the back. I then made eye contact with the girl. She looked innocent, but I shot her too. Twice actually. I sat with the bodies for a bit, but I eventually made my way out of the forest and continued on with my life. I wasn't instructed to do this. I just wanted to try.
The police who heard this confession could hardly control their emotions. They were overwhelmed with a mix of anger and sadness. A walker who heard the shots called the police right away. He even saw someone coming from the bushes, but luckily wasn't spotted himself. Glenn was picked up later that day due to the description given to him by the man, and he confessed immediately. He almost seemed proud of what he did. The names of the victims were Tyson, age 46, Tessa, age 44, Walden, age 21, and Madison, age 15. Sadly, none of them survived the shooting. Glenn was sentenced to 30 years behind bars, never fully admitting to why he committed such a crime other than to say, "I just wanted to make an impact." He still sits in prison to this day. Story number 3, A House of Horrors. In 1992, a man by the name of Pablo Suarez, born in 1960, moved into his own house with his then-girlfriend, Grimilda. They previously lived across the street from one another with their parents, but were happy to finally move into their own home. That happiness, however, would be short-lived. The home, located in Pennsylvania, was a simple 1,400 square foot home with an unfinished basement. According to family members of Grimilda, after they moved in together is when Pablo's real side started to show. The reports show that Pablo beat his girlfriend multiple times, and at times Grimilda sustained serious injuries. She had her ribs, arms, and nose all broken by Pablo, and sustained a serious head injury from being pushed down the stairs, causing a blood clot in her brain. Pablo was even arrested in 1993, but he was not indicted. It took until 1996 that Grimilda, who now had 4 children, finally moved out of the house and away from Pablo. Her torment, however, still did not end there. In 2005, Grimilda filed for charges claiming that Pablo had continued to stalk, assault, and even kidnap her daughters multiple times. She was granted a restraining order, but it was later dismissed. Sadly, in 2012, Romilda passed away from complications from her brain injuries suffered from her relationship with Pablo. This story, however, is not the main part of Pablo's story. This was just told to give an insight into the kind of man he was, and only a part of the story that led to this house feeling like a house of horrors. In 2002, a woman by the name of Michelle, age 21, left her cousin's house and was on her way to court for a child custody hearing, as the state was currently in custody of her son. However, she never showed up to court. Police admit they did not perform a full investigation due to the belief that she had simply run away, and little manpower was put into locating Michelle. In 2003, a woman by the name of Amanda also went missing. She was just 17 years old at the time. She was last seen finishing her shift at Burger King. FBI initially believed she was a runaway until a week after she disappeared, her mother received an anonymous phone call from a man saying that she has her daughter and she will be returned. Lastly, a girl by the name of Gina, aged only 14 years old, went missing in April of 2004. She was last seen by a payphone. This disappearance was later linked to when Amanda went missing, but police seemed to have no leads. All three of these women were kidnapped by Pablo, and the torment that followed was truly awful. I warn viewers now, the following depiction of what took place is not easy to listen to. Over the course of the next several years, it was found out how Pablo treated these women. The first woman he kidnapped, Michelle, was tied up and left in the dark for multiple days at a time without food or water. She was regularly beaten, raped, and threatened of murder. She was believed to have been impregnated 5 times by Pablo, but he induced miscarriages each time from the beatings and lack of food. Gina, the girl who was only 14 at the time of her kidnapping, was also raped and beaten, but didn't believe she had ever gotten pregnant. Amanda, the 17-year-old at the time of her kidnapping, was also beaten and raped by Pablo, and she did end up giving birth in 2006 to a daughter. Pablo would even take this girl out of the house to visit members of his family. Neighbors of Pablo claimed to have called the police multiple times about strange activities in the house, but police deny that this ever happened. In 2003, good news does come from this story. Amanda, the girl who had given birth, was finally able to communicate with one of the neighbors. She screamed for help through a screen door when Pablo was out for the day. The neighbor came by and kicked a hole in the door, and Amanda crawled out, carrying her daughter, now 6, in her arms. With the help of the neighbors, police were called and they showed up immediately to Pablo's home. They then rescued Gina and Michelle. Michelle was reported to have leapt into the officer's arms upon being saved. Pablo was later arrested, and the trial that followed became quite conflicting on how Pablo would react. He gave a speech indicating that he was a good man. He was not a monster. He never beat the women, and the sex was always consensual. However, he did ask for their forgiveness. Pablo Suarez was eventually sentenced to over 1,000 years in prison with no chance of parole. To make matters a bit more frustrating, only 1 month after being put in jail, Pablo committed suicide, only suffering for 1 month, even though he took 9, 10, and 11 years from the 3 girls he kidnapped. Pablo was 53 years old at the time of his death. So that's the end of the third story. I know this episode was a bit harder to listen to, but do you know which story is false? Story number 1, a woman supposedly killing her children just to be with a man she was having an affair with. Or 2, a teenager who murdered an entire family just because he felt like it. Or maybe is it 3, a man kidnapping and torturing 3 girls for 9, 10, and 11 years. Let's start with story number 1. This story is sadly true. The woman's real name being Susan Smith, and her ex-husband really being named David. Susan Smith still sits behind bars at Leith Correctional Institute in North Carolina, but is eligible for parole in 2024. Now, let's move on to story number 3. It truly pains me to say that this is a true story, with Ariel Castro being the real name of the villain. The victims' full names being Michelle Knight, Amanda Berry, and Gina DeJesus. The 3 women who must have been so strong managed to live on. Michelle got married in 2016, and the other 2 girls both received honorary diplomas. That means that story number 2, while the New Cut Gang is a real gang located in the UK, it's an entirely false story. So that concludes today's episodes. 3 stories that you hope are made up, and at least one of them was. Do you know which one I wrote to try and fool you? Please comment your guess down below. And if you enjoy this, please like and subscribe, and it'll inspire me to keep making more. Thank you, and have a wonderful day.